Hi, I'm Ken Holliday. I'm with the National Cemetery Administration's Veterans Legacy Program. I'm out here on this nice hot day out in Baltimore National Cemetery. The Baltimore Cemetery was opened and dedicated Memorial Day of 1941. However, the first burial was in 1936. This was a much needed expansion cemetery. The nearby Loudon Park National Cemetery was at or near capacity when this was dedicated. It is still active. We are still taking active burials at this cemetery, and it's been here ever since. This is just one of 155 national cemeteries that we have in our entire system, and that spans the entire country of the U.S., including one of the newest ones in Morovis, which is in Puerto Rico. We have 141 state, tribal, and territory cemeteries that were funded by VA grants, and we consider those part of our system as well. We have 3.8 million veterans interred over all of our cemeteries. As you see behind me, it's just hills of rolling white at every cemetery you go to, but it's important to realize that tied to each grave marker is a story. We hope that this short tour will highlight that fact. We'll be able to show some stories of service and lives of some of these veterans. And I hope that it highlights the work that we do every day within the Legacy Program at NCA to honor these veterans and make sure that their legacies will always be remembered. For more information about the work that Legacy does and how you can get involved in helping share these stories out to the community and with students, please visit our website. And if you want to learn more about the National Cemetery Administration, you can visit their website at www.nca.va.gov. You'll see a tour of Baltimore National Cemetery today, but each cemetery is unique in its own way. With cemeteries across the country, they don't all look like green rolling hills full of grave markers. Some in the desert out in Arizona, they are just sand. Some cemeteries, instead of having uprights, are dominated by flat markers. Each cemetery is unique to the state that it's in, and really captures a feeling of the topography of that state. So as you're walking through a cemetery, you'll come across grave markers, and each one has certain fields of data that is standard across all of them. Of course, you have the name of the service member or veteran, followed by their rank of the service they were in, the service they were in, the war periods that they served in, their date of birth, and their date of death. The last two lines are personalized and can be etched with a short saying of what a family member might want. And sometimes they put, as in the case of James Cronin here, New Jersey, which was, I assume, his birthplace. At the top of the grave marker is the service member or veteran's choice of emblem of belief. These vary greatly, and more are added frequently. James here has the Latin cross, which is one of the original two emblems of belief that was given at the time between the Latin cross and the Star of David. Now, modern days, we have upwards of 80 different emblems of beliefs that a veteran or service member can choose from.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Price, and I'm an education specialist with the Veterans Legacy Program of the National Cemetery Administration. I'm standing here in Section E of Baltimore National Cemetery, a section that has a high number of World War II service members interred here, to tell you some of the stories of the individuals who fought and died during World War II. We're standing here at the graveside of PFC Dolores Ruddock, who was a World War II veteran here in Section E of Baltimore National Cemetery. As you can see, Dolores was recently interred in this plot. She passed away in March of this year, 2021. And the reason we decided to select her is because she was a member of a very special unit of the Women's Army Corps that served during World War II. She was a member of the 68th 88th Central Postal Directory Battalion, otherwise known as the 6888, which was the only African American WAC unit to deploy to Europe during World War II. Their job was to sort through a backlog of mail that had been developing since the invasion of Normandy. And they went over there. Initially, no African American service members, at least in the Women's Army Corps, were going to be permitted to go overseas, but they changed that due to the backlog of mail that had developed in the European theater of operations. So she and 850 of her fellow black WACs went over to Birmingham, England, and eventually they sorted through 17 million pieces of mail that had been backlogged and waiting in a warehouse. So they worked in 3 8-hour shifts, working 24 hours a day to knock out that backlog. And because of that, their motto is no mail, low morale. So they actually performed a very important function for the U.S. Army during World War II. Service members in foxholes getting shot at. You know, it's nice to get a piece of mail when you're in that situation, and they were the ones that made sure that that mail got to those service members. We're here again in Section E at the grave of Sergeant Cody Wolfe, who was a member of the Army Air Forces who served during World War II. He was a member of the 8th Air Force and was on a bombing mission with the B-17 Ritzy Blitz in January of 1944 when his plane was attacked by German fighters. This was during the early part of the air campaign over Europe, where the Army Air Forces had not thought to get fighter escorts for their bombers. And during this period of the war, United States bombers, such as the B-17 that Sergeant Wolfe was on, suffered heavily at the hands of German fighter pilots. So he was buried overseas in Europe during the war and then reinterred here in Baltimore after World War II.
Another feature of the national cemeteries are various monuments that are dedicated within the cemetery. Every national cemetery has a spot for these monuments throughout the cemetery, and they can be dedicated by certain veteran service organizations or associations within the local area, or they might be dedicated by an organization that has some sort of significant tie to the cemetery itself. Perhaps they have a number of veterans that were a part of that unit. Behind me are 6 monuments from various Marine Division associations, and these were dedicated here by local VSOs.
So we're here at the graveside of Tech 5 John Hall Owings Jr., who served in the Army Air Force during World War II. And sometimes when you look at these white marble headstones, you have to do a little bit of digging. And sometimes when you look at the date of death, that will be the key indicator for how this individual passed away. So Owings here was in the Philippines when World War II began in 1941. And when the Japanese captured Clark Field, in the Philippines, he was captured. After that, he was sent on the infamous Bataan Death March, and as you see on his headstone there, he died in May of 1942, shortly after he had arrived in his prisoner of war camp. The Bataan Death March was one of the most infamous war crimes of World War II, and Owings likely died from a mixture of starvation or disease at the hands of the Japanese in World War II. So this is the gravesite of Private Hiram Plummer III, who was a Maryland resident before World War II began. He joined the Army in 1944 and was assigned to the 95th Infantry Division, sent over to the European Theater of Operations. And he arrived in Europe in October of 1944, and as you can see from his headstone, he was killed in December. So he had a very short time in Europe serving with his unit. What Private Plummer did for his unit earned him the Bronze Star for heroism. And I have the citation here. He was in an observation post that was under attack by German infantry and artillery, and he was in the highest part of the building observing the enemy that were coming in and calling down to his fellow soldiers so that they could know where the attack was coming from. And the Germans figured this out, and they started sending artillery shells towards the building that he was in. And he survived 3 barrages, but was killed, unfortunately, on the 4th barrage. But for that single act of valor for his unit, he was awarded the Bronze Star. And I have the citation here. It says, "Private Plummer's heroic perseverance in the face of overwhelming danger reflects lasting heroism on him and exemplifies the highest achievements of the military service."
So here's a Medal of Honor recipient, Laddie Stupka. His grave marker, as well as most other Medal of Honor recipients in the National Cemetery, are identifiable with the gold engravings on their marker. It's also important to know that the emblem of the Medal of Honor that's used on the grave marker is relevant to the service that they were in. Stupka here was in the Navy, so he right there is the Navy Medal of Honor. An Army Medal of Honor recipient would have a different emblem on their grave marker.
Well, we're here at the gravesite of Sergeant Anthony Decristofaro, who was a Marine killed in action during World War II. His headstone says that he is from Pennsylvania, but he actually was born in Italy in 1920 and came to the United States shortly before World War II, settling in Pennsylvania with his family. When he learned that Pearl Harbor had been attacked on December 7th, 1941, the story is that he borrowed $2 from his grandmother and took the bus to Philadelphia, where he joined the United States Marines. He eventually was assigned to the 1st Marine Division and saw action on Guadalcanal, and unfortunately was killed in action in 1943 fighting on New Britain. For his gallantry in action, he was awarded the Navy Cross for heroism. So I have Sergeant Decristofaro's Navy Cross citation here, and it reads, "For extraordinary heroism while serving with the 1st Marine Division during operations against enemy Japanese forces on Cape Gloucester, New Britain Island, December 28, 1943. Voluntarily patrolling forward of our positions, Sergeant Decristofaro penetrated the enemy lines, locating fortified enemy positions which he reported promptly to his commanding officer, thereby enabling our forces to register artillery on exact enemy positions and render them useless. Returning to the front lines, Sergeant Decristofaro lost his life while attempting to silence an enemy machine gun. His aggressive fighting spirit, valiant self-sacrifice, and stout-hearted devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country."
Another common feature you'll find in any national cemetery is a plaque of President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. This is found at every national cemetery because it's crucial to why the national cemetery system exists. The cemetery system was created in Lincoln's vision as a way to heal the nation after the Civil War. All veterans are buried together in any national cemetery. They are not divided by rank, race, service, gender, or religion.
So I mentioned earlier that the dates on a headstone can tell you a lot about the experience of an individual service member. If you look at the date of death on this headstone here for gunner's mate Paul Gosnell, you notice that he was killed on December 7th, 1941, the day of the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor when the Japanese tried to take out the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Gunner's mate Gosnell was a native of Delaware. He had a wife and young son, had been serving in the Navy for 12 years when the attack on Pearl Harbor happened. He was aboard the USS Shaw manning an anti-aircraft gun when he was unfortunately killed, making him one of the very first people from Delaware killed in World War II. His father was from Maryland, so he decided to have his body reinterred here in Baltimore National Cemetery because of the family's connections to the state of Maryland. So as you see, December 7th, 1941, you can learn a lot about the individuals buried in a national cemetery by looking at their dates of death. You can pretty much teach the entire history of the Second World War, at least the United States involvement, through the individuals that are buried here and their individual stories.
Thank you for joining us on this short tour of Baltimore National Cemetery to learn some of the stories of the veterans that are interred here, as well as the history of the cemetery and the National Cemetery Administration. We appreciate you sharing our mission and remembering these veterans and ensuring that their legacies carry on. We'll be happy to take any questions.